What's going on, everyone? Let's talk about bank bail-ins. The new bailouts. What are they? Let's take a look. So a foreword real quick. During the 2007, 2009, 2008 global financial crisis, the tools available to central banks and other authorities were simply not fit for the purpose to address the failure of some of the world's largest financial institutions. The question of how to tackle banks that were considered too big to fail had only one answer: public bailouts. The U.S. government had to step in and inject public money to the tune of $164 billion to stabilize the financial sector. Many other governments around the world had to take similar extraordinary steps. Now, over the last decade, the bank, as the U.S.'s resolution authority, has worked closely with the Fed, other authorities, and firms themselves to enhance the preparedness and improve the resolvability of banks in the event of a financial crisis. A key innovation during that decade has been to develop the concept of bailing in shareholders and other investors in the failed bank, in contrast to publicly funded bailouts. Today, bail-in is a recognized part of the toolkit of stabilization powers available to the bank and other resolution authorities. Bail-in means we can be more confident that banks will be able to keep critical services operating through resolution and restructuring, while maintaining appropriate financial resources and with costs borne by the failed bank's owners and investors rather than depositors or taxpayers. For bank resolution to be credible and for the bank to meet its obligations to the Treasury that major U.S. banks should be resolvable by 2022, excuse me, bail-in has to be more than a concept. It has to be a practical tool which the bank is able to deploy if necessary. Now, managing the failure of a bank of any size is unlikely ever going to be a smooth process. A bail-in is likely to be a highly complex transaction involving multiple parties. Now, getting this to point has involved the working with a number of other authorities and other entities, including financial market infrastructures, and their support will also be vital in the event of executing a bail-in. So, introduction real quick. So we're going to look at the Bank of England real quick and their literature on this. So the Bank of England, as the UK's resolution authority, is responsible for taking action to manage the failure of certain financial institutions, including UK headquartered banking groups and UK incorporated banks, and building societies together firms, societies, a process known as resolution. Resolution allows the shareholders and unsecured creditors of failed firms to be fully exposed to losses, while ensuring the critical functions of the firm can continue and helping to preserve financial stability. Resolution reduces risk to depositors, the financial system, and public funds that could arise due to the failure of a firm. By ensuring losses will fall on a failed firm's investors rather than depositors or taxpayers, resolution can both reduce the risk of firm failures by supporting market discipline and limit the impact of failure when it does occur. Wow. Bail-in is one of the stabilization tools available to the banks as resolution authority under the Banking Act of 2009 dictates. Now, bail-in ensures investors rather than public funds bear losses. Bail-in enables the bank to impose losses on shareholders and to write down or convert into equity the value of the claims of certain unsecured creditors so that the failed firm can be recapitalized and continue to operate, thereby ensuring the continuity of critical functions pending a reorganization of the business that addresses the causes of failure. The exposure of shareholders and creditors to losses in resolution should respect the order in which they would have received distributions in an insolvency of the firm, and leave them no worse off than they would have been if the firm had been placed into an insolvency process. This is a key protection for investors and firms, as known as no creditor worse off safeguard. The bank considers that for the largest systematically important firms, UK global systematically important banks such as GSIBs and domestic systematically important banks DSIBs, the use of bail-in resolution strategy is likely to be the way in which the special resolution objectives would be best met in the event of the failure of the firm. Such firms whose entry into insolvency would be too disruptive for their banking customers and services are also required to have additional financial resources. So basically, resolution allows the shareholders and unsecured creditors of failed firms to be fully exposed to losses while ensuring that the critical functions of the firm can continue. How about that? Now, this is the timeline of execution for bail-ins. We're going to discuss pre-resolution contingency planning and resolution weekend. That's right. It's going to happen likely over a weekend. So pre-resolution contingency planning, the bank will carry out a resolution condition assessment. They will appoint an independent valuer. They will gather information on instruments and liabilities. They will determine structure of bail-in. They will prepare structure of the CE program for the firm to issue. They will prepare the bail-in resolution instrument and liaises with other parties, including CSDs, ICSDs, that's a European thing, and other authorities. Resolution weekend, the bank announces the bail-in, makes the bail-in resolution instrument, and specifies the resolution time. And they also appoint a bail-in administrator, or BIA. So BIA is, of course, going to be a bank, and they exercise full control over the firm. Ordinary shares are transferred to a depository. Preferences shares and AT1/Tier 2 instruments are written down and canceled. Treatment of other bail-in liabilities is set out in the bail-in resolution instrument. Trading and settlement of relevant instruments is suspended or canceled as appropriate. We'll talk about these other two in the next one. So pre-resolution contingency planning. In this stage, the template resolution instruments would be a useful starting point for the preparation of the instruments and other documents required for the bail-in. The bank would tailor the template resolution instruments to reflect the specific case, the powers to be exercised, and a range of other factors. For the reasons noted below, the bank reserves its discretion to depart from the approach in the template resolution instrument should it be judged appropriate in the circumstances of a particular case. There are many other actions that will need to take place during a resolution, including valuations, restructuring planning, and communications with stakeholders. It is not intended to provide a comprehensive overview of all aspects as far as this document here, and they talk about the RIF statement of policy for more information. Now, the bail-in tool was introduced into the United Kingdom specifically in 2013, as at the time of publication, the bank had not used the bail-in tool. Indeed, because it is an innovative only introduced after the 2008 global financial crisis, instances of bail-in of banks anywhere in the world are rare. So, in summary, to be considered resolvable, a firm must, as a minimum, be able to achieve 3 resolvability outcomes. Number 1, have adequate financial resources in the context of resolution, be able to continue to do business through resolution and restructuring. Number 3, be able to coordinate and communicate effectively within the firm and with the authorities and markets so that resolution and subsequent restructuring can happen. Now, resolvability outcomes, we have our financial resources right here. Minimum requirement, you got to have minimum financial requirement. Continuity and restructuring. Then we have coordination and communication. Management, government, and communication. So proceeds flow in a bail-in. This is the waterfall here. At the top, you start with secured debts, flows down to liquidators' fees and expenses, flows down to ordinary preferential debts, then to secondary preferential debts, then to floating charge debts, ordinary non-preferential debts, statutory interest, secondary non-preferential debts, tertiary non-preferential debts, shareholders, preferred shareholders, and then lastly, ordinary shareholders at the very bottom. So the assets of a company in liquidation will be distributed as shown in the waterfall. The claims of creditors in the top row will be met first, with any excess assets being passed down to meet claims of creditors in the next row, and so on. Any losses arising from a shortfall between proceeds and creditor claims are incurred firstly by shareholders and then passed up the creditor hierarchy until they are fully absorbed. In a liquidation, any surplus remaining after the payment of the debts proved in a winding up shall, before being applied for any other purpose, be applied in paying interest on those debts, in respect of the periods during which they have been outstanding since the company went into the liquidation. Depending on the terms of secondary non-preferential debts and their interpretation, these can rank ahead of statutory interest. Now, the resolution weekend. If the bank, in consultation with other relevant authorities, has determined that the resolution conditions have been met, and it satisfies that the use of the bail-in stabilization option is in the public interest, and that action is necessary to advance the resolution objectives set out in the Banking Act, resolution will be triggered. Once the bank has decided to place a firm into resolution, it will make a bail-in resolution instrument, which is obliged published as soon as it is reasonably practicable after making the instrument. The making of the bail-in resolution instrument, the time at which it is to come into force, and the measure provided for the bail-in resolution instrument would be announced by the bank, and the bail-in resolution instrument would be published at the same time. The firm in resolution would also make an announcement at the same time. The final preparations for resolution and the making of the bail-in resolution instrument are likely to take place over a weekend, sometimes informally referred to as the resolution weekend. So the bank, it announces the bail-in, makes the bail-in resolution instrument, and then specifies the resolution time. Then they appoint a bail-in administrator, or a bank, and then that BIA, will exercise full control over the firm. Ordinary shares are transferred to a depository. Hey, look, they're transferring shares for you in a bail-in. Preferences shares and the AT1/T2 instruments are written down and canceled. Treatment of other bail-in liabilities is set out in the bail-in resolution instrument. And then lastly, trading and settlement of relevant instruments is suspended or canceled as appropriate. The bail-in resolution instrument will also bail in or announce the proposed bail-in of bail-in liabilities. They will specify the treatment of coupon and principal payments in respect of bail-in liabilities during the bail-in period. They will effect suspensions as applicable of the U.S. listings of the shares and the eligible liabilities in the form of securities, and they will appoint a bail-in administrator. They will specify the arrangements for drawing up the business reorganization plan, and if necessary, give directions to and or remove directors of the firm in resolution. Lastly, specify the actions to be taken by the relevant registrars, common depositories, safekeepers, and others. The bail-in administrator, of course, is a bank, and it may be appointed to perform some or all of the following duties. Work with the firm to draw up the business plan required by Section 48H of the Banking Act. They will have to get with an independent valuer to support the production, updating, or revision of valuations, hold any securities temporarily transferred or issued to the BIA, where the bail-in resolution instrument provides for securities to be transferred to another person, including the ordinary shares of the firm, exercise voting rights to be exercisable as directed by the bank, and or be authorized to manage the firm's business or to exercise any powers of the firm. The bank has considered the flexibility to determine whether to appoint a BIA and what the BIA should be responsible for. This is important as it allows the bank to determine the most appropriate role according to the specific circumstances of each case. The bank may appoint more than one BIA to perform functions in respect of the firm in resolution, and a BIA may be an individual or a body corporate. Of course, the bank also has discretion to take on the role of BIA itself. Oh, wonderful. In most circumstances, the bank would be likely to appoint an individual rather than a firm as BIA. So next we'll look at the bail-in period, what that looks like, and then the end of bail-in. Isn't this great? Isn't this great? Crime Central, baby. Talk to you later.